The article highlights a serious issue regarding a home inspector's failure to disclose a known fire hazard associated with federal Pacific breaker panels. This raises concerns about professional responsibility and the safety of homebuyers. The inspector acknowledged the risk associated with federal Pacific panels but did not inform the buyer about it. This failure violates the inspector's obligation to reveal known hazards that could endanger the occupants of the home. The inspectors claim that 30% of homes he inspects have federal Pacific panels is dubious, suggesting a lack of awareness about the prevalence of this hazardous panel type. The inspector's reluctance to disclose the hazard stems from fear that escrows will fall through, leading to potential lawsuits from sellers. This reasoning prioritizes the inspector's financial interests over the buyer's safety. Furthermore, the inspector's assertion that he is not obligated to disclose known hazards contradicts accepted standards of practice in the home inspection industry. Given the inspector's negligence and disregard for the buyer's safety, legal action is strongly recommended. Small claims court is an appropriate venue for this case, allowing the homeowner to seek compensation without incurring substantial legal expenses. The homeowner should provide evidence of the inspector's failure to disclose the hazard and the resulting cost of replacing the panel. In addition to legal action, the homeowner should consider filing a complaint with the relevant state home inspector licensing board. This would help ensure that the inspector is held responsible for their misconduct and that other homebuyers are protected from similar negligence in the future. The home inspector's actions in this case demonstrate a serious breach of professional responsibility and a disregard for the buyer's safety. The homeowner has a valid claim for compensation and should pursue all available options to hold the inspector accountable and prevent future incident. The failure to disclose such critical information can have significant consequences for the homeowner, both financially and in terms of safety. The electrical panel is a crucial component of any home's electrical system, and a faulty or hazardous panel can pose a serious risk of fire or electrical shock. Federal Pacific Electric, or FPE, panels have a history of defects that can lead to breaker failure. This failure can prevent the breaker from tripping in an overcurrent situation, which can cause the wires to overheat and potentially start a fire. The Consumer Product Safety Commission, or CPSC, investigated FPE panels in the 1980s but closed the investigation without requiring a recall. However, independent testing has confirmed the defects and hazards associated with these panels. The presence of an FPE panel in a home is a significant safety concern and should be addressed immediately by a qualified electrician. Replacing the panel is the recommended solution to mitigate the risk of fire or electrical shock. A home inspector should be aware of the risks associated with FPE panels and should disclose this information to the buyer. Failure to do so constitutes negligence and a breach of professional responsibility. Home inspectors have a duty to protect the interests of their clients and to provide them with accurate and complete information about the condition of the property. This includes disclosing any known hazards that could affect the safety or value of the home. In this case, the inspector's failure to disclose the presence of the FPE panel resulted in financial loss and safety concerns for the homeowner. The homeowner had to pay to replace the panel, and they were also exposed to the risk of fire or electrical shock. The inspector's actions are unacceptable and should be addressed through legal action and disciplinary measures. Homeowners should be aware of the risks associated with FPE panels and should have their electrical panels inspected by a qualified electrician if they have any concerns. It is also important to choose a home inspector who is knowledgeable and experienced and who will provide a thorough and accurate inspection of the property. When selecting a home inspector, it is advisable to check their credentials and experience. Look for inspectors who are certified by a reputable organization such as the American Society of Home Inspectors, or ASHI. Also, read reviews and ask for references from previous clients. A qualified home inspector should be able to identify potential problems with the electrical system, including the presence of FPE panels. They should also be able to provide recommendations for addressing these problems. In addition to the electrical panel, there are other components of the electrical system that should be inspected during a home inspection. These include the wiring, outlets, switches, and grounding system. The wiring should be in good condition and properly sized for the electrical load. Outlets and switches should be properly installed and functioning correctly. The grounding system should be properly installed and connected to provide a safe path for electrical current in the event of a fault. Any problems with these components should be addressed by a qualified electrician. It is also important to have a qualified electrician inspect the electrical system if you are planning to make any changes or additions to the electrical system. This includes adding new circuits, installing new appliances, or remodeling the home. A qualified electrician can ensure that the electrical system is safe and up to code. Electrical safety is essential for protecting your home and family from fire and electrical shock. By taking the necessary precautions, you can ensure that your electrical system is safe and reliable. Here are some additional tips for electrical safety. Firstly, never overload circuits or extension cords. Secondly, use extension cords only temporarily and never run them under rugs or furniture. Thirdly, replace any damaged or frayed electrical cords. Fourthly, keep electrical appliances away from water. Fifthly, install ground fault circuit interrupters or GFCIs in bathrooms, kitchens, and other areas where water is present. Sixthly, test GFCIs regularly to ensure that they are working properly. Seventhly, have your electrical system inspected by a qualified electrician every few years. Eighthly, install smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors in your home and test them regularly. Ninthly, develop an emergency plan in case of a fire or electrical shock. Tenthly, teach your children about electrical safety. By following these tips, you can help prevent electrical fires and injuries in your home. Regarding Federal Pacific Electric stab lock panels, here are some specific points to consider. These panels were commonly installed in homes built between the 1950s and 1980s. The problem with FP stab lock breakers is that they can fail to trip when there is an overcurrent or short circuit. This can lead to overheating of the wires and potentially a fire. Independent testing has shown that FP stab lock breakers fail to trip in a significant percentage of cases. The CPSC investigated FP panels but closed the investigation without requiring a recall due to limited resources and legal challenges. However, the CPSC continues to advise homeowners to have their FPE panels inspected by a qualified electrician. If you have an FPE panel, it is recommended that you replace it with a modern circuit breaker panel that meets current safety standards. A qualified electrician can inspect your panel and determine if it needs to be replaced. Replacing an FPE panel is a relatively straightforward process that can be completed in a few hours by a qualified electrician. The cost of replacing an FPE panel will vary depending on the size of the panel and the complexity of the installation. However, the cost is well worth it to protect your home and family from the risk of fire or electrical shock. When replacing an FPE panel, it is important to choose a qualified electrician who is experienced in this type of work. The electrician should be licensed and insured and should be able to provide references from previous clients. The electrician should also be able to obtain the necessary permits for the work. Before replacing the panel, the electrician will need to disconnect the power to the house. They will then remove the old panel and install the new panel. The electrician will then connect the wiring to the new panel and test the circuits to ensure that they are working properly. Once the work is completed, the electrician will provide you with a certificate of compliance. This certificate indicates that the work has been completed in accordance with the electrical code. If you are not sure whether you have an FPE panel, you can have it inspected by a qualified electrician. The electrician will be able to identify the panel and determine if it needs to be replaced. Do not attempt to inspect or replace the panel yourself. Electrical work can be dangerous and it is best left to a qualified electrician. Here are some additional resources for information on Federal Pacific Electric stab lock panels. Firstly, the Consumer Product Safety Commission website. Secondly, the Electrical Safety Foundation International website. Thirdly, your local electrical code enforcement office. By taking the necessary precautions, you can protect your home and family from the risks associated with Federal Pacific Electric stab lock panels. The home inspector in the scenario acted unethically and negligently. Here are some of the reasons why the inspector's actions are considered unethical and negligent. Firstly, failure to disclose a known hazard. The inspector admitted that Federal Pacific panels are hazardous but failed to inform the buyer. This is a direct violation of the inspector's duty to disclose known hazards that could endanger the safety of the home occupants. Secondly, inaccurate knowledge. The inspector claimed that 30% of homes he inspects have Federal Pacific panels. This claim is highly questionable and suggests that the inspector may not be adequately informed about the prevalence of this hazardous panel type. Thirdly, self-serving motive. The inspector's reluctance to disclose the hazard is attributed to his fear that such disclosures would lead to escrows falling out and potential lawsuits from sellers. This rationale places the inspector's financial interests above the safety of the buyer. Fourthly, contradiction with industry standards. The inspector's claim that he has no obligation to disclose known hazards contradicts accepted standards of practice in the home inspection industry. Home inspectors are expected to represent the interests of home buyers by reporting observable conditions that could be of concern or consequence. Fifthly, disregard for safety. The inspector's actions demonstrate a disregard for the safety of the buyer and their family. Federal Pacific panels are a known fire hazard, and the inspector's failure to disclose this information put the buyer at risk. The inspector's actions are not only unethical but also potentially illegal. Home inspectors can be held liable for negligence if they fail to disclose known hazards that cause damage or injury. In this case, the homeowner incurred expenses to replace the panel and was also exposed to the risk of fire or electrical shock. The homeowner has a valid claim against the inspector and should pursue legal action to recover their losses and hold the inspector accountable for their misconduct. The homeowner should also consider filing a complaint with the relevant state home inspector licensing board. This could help to ensure that the inspector is held accountable for their misconduct and that other home buyers are protected from similar negligence in the future. The purpose of a home inspection is to provide the buyer with information about the condition of the property so that they can make an informed decision about whether to purchase the property. The inspector is expected to be objective and unbiased and to disclose any known hazards or defects that could affect the safety or value of the property. In this case, the inspector failed to meet these expectations and acted in a way that was detrimental to the buyer's interests. Home inspectors have a responsibility to uphold the standards of their profession and to protect the interests of their clients. When they fail to do so, they should be held accountable for their actions. The inspector's claim that routine disclosures of this kind would cause many deals to fall out of escrow, exposing him to lawsuits from sellers, is not a valid excuse for his misconduct. The inspector has a duty to disclose known hazards, regardless of the potential consequences. The inspector's fear of lawsuits from sellers is not a valid reason to put the safety of home buyers at risk.